Greetings, everybody. Today we'll be talking about something that has happened 7 years ago. We will be looking at what happened to New York Times and its relation to Syrian Electronic Army. Before we begin, I would like to let you know what tools and methods we will be using. First, we'll be using Farsight Security Passive DNS database. This is high-fidelity, worldwide DNS observations going back to June 2010. We will be using dnsdbq, which is a command line tool to query DNSDB. You can go and download it through our GitHub. Also, we'll be using Scout, our GUI tool to query DNSDB. And if you hit this link, you would be able to reach that. You also would need to have an API key, which you can easily request from our website as a trial. Second, what we need to know is very simplify understanding the structure of the DNS record and how we would be using the search through the passive DNS database. This is a typical DNS record, very, very simplified. On the left side, you have resource record name, for example, farsight.security.com, www.farsightsecurity.com. This would be a type of the record. In this particular case, it's name server, which points to NS5, dnsmadeeasy.com. And also you would have, for example, a record, which indicates the translation from the host name to its IP. At the beginning, you would probably use left side search. You will be searched through resource record names to identify what data is associated with those records. Also, you would be able to search through resource record data or right-hand side. And this also would be very useful, and we will definitely learn how to do that. All right, let's begin. Let's say you visit your local library and you have these little slides, or you go and print it off the web, and you found an article, something that caught your attention. New York Times hacked Syrian Electronic Army is suspected. Because it happened long ago, let's assume that we don't know anything about it, but we will go through the data and try to figure it out what data will tell us and how the data, what is telling the story to us, would be relevant and consistent with what we already know 7 years later. So this article was dated August 28, 2013. It says that New York Times was hacked Tuesday. 28th of August is Wednesday, so because it's news and news is perishable product, we assume that it was 27th of August 2013. Nobody would report something which would happen a week before. By the way, if you would like to know more a little bit about Syrian Electronic Army, you can just search for this term through your preferred search engine. Okay. So what happened on August 27th with New York Times? In this case, we will be using dnsdbq, the command line interface tool, which would query our passive DNS database. We will be asking for resource record name, and we go through that left-hand side. We would be asking what happened to New York Times, asking for a record type, and we will be very specific. We would like to know what happened between August 26 and August 29. Exactly, this is what it says, -c says. And we will sort it. By the way, you can pause this video, you can download the tool, and you can try to do the same thing on your own and see if your records are the same, and also learn a little bit about the tool and data, or improve your skills with what you already know. So what can we see here? First of all, we know that that record has been changed on 27th of August. And New York Times was pointed at a different IP and another IP. And it happened within the data interval, which we were very interested about. So for several hours, New York Times website was pointed to two different IPs. By the way, check if their mail server was also redirected. Maybe it would be a concern that someone else would be receiving emails on behalf of New York Times. So how this might have happened? Okay, so let's do something next. First of all, let's see how the New York Times website was redirected elsewhere. For that, we need to query their name server. And we also asking for very same time period, because that is when change has happened. So what we see is that their DNS appears to be hijacked at registrar level. Why? Because the bailiwick.com, which is .com, points at different name servers. This is what the data tells us, you see? And very interesting, these are reported by the registrar. Bailiwick means the authority which would be reporting, to make it simple. And this is all the way to the registrar. Another very interesting things to look at, that it was something which is boxsecured.com. So the registrar also was redirecting, and the boxsecured.com also was responding or responsible for New York Times. So let's make this mental mark, because that would be very important. But what we can see from this data, it appears that it could be two different environments which were responsible to present or represent the New York Times to the whole internet. What we do first, let's check where all those name servers was hosted at the time of that compromise. What we do, we check the resource record for all those name servers, which we saw on the previous slide. And as you can see, some of those name servers were resolved to one specific IP. You couldn't find this in passive DNS database. Just you need to know that no one can see everything. It might happen that those were not ever active, or it might happen that we just will not be able to observe them because of the placement of our sensors. But we have already sufficient amount of data to progress further. What else can we do? We can also conclude or think that that IP, or the machine on that IP, or set of machines on that IP, potentially might have been in the full possession or ownership over the malicious actor. And if we do the same for the box secured, we see that that infrastructure was spread over several IPs. So the hypothesis here would be that second infrastructure was only compromised rather than being fully possessed or being owned. Okay, what else can we do? Now let's look at what has been sitting or served from that IPs at that time. So now we would be searching through the right side of the DNS records, and we will be searching through IPs. We will be asking DNSDB a question. What are all the hosts which were served on that IP? As you can see, through the time, which was beyond and after the compromise, that IP was advertised for all this infrastructure, for all these hosts. We see CA, Syrian Electronic Army, something which is quite consistent, leaks, Qatar leaks. So we know from geopolitics that Syria and Qatar are not necessarily were friends at that time, or maybe even now. But a part of those Syrian Electronic Army or relation to that, we see TWIMG. TWIMG. We perhaps don't know what it is at the moment, but let's see if you could explain it moving forward. If we make the same query for the different IP or set of IPs, right? Because that is where this New York Times have been sitting, if you remember, but only on that time, we would see again New York Times and TWIMG. So if you see this and these names, now we can speculate that it perhaps was not only the same actor, but it might be the same campaign. So it does not contradict our hypothesis that the first IP, this one, was in the full possession of the and ownership of the actors. But the second IP, because it's 121 and it was different IPs for name servers, so we may continue hypothesize that that infrastructure was only compromised and malicious actors were able to change the records or maybe embed some malicious websites in them. Okay, what else can we do? Why don't we go and search what domains were served by those name servers? So in this case, let's take one of those. And what we are doing is we are asking passive DNS database, DNSDB, what resources have been served by this name server. At that time, we would be interested at that time. So we have Twitter, huffingtonpost.co.uk, again, twimg.com, New York Times, of course, we know that already, sharethis.com. Right, so it seems we have more than just New York Times. Interesting. Does it mean that more infrastructure and more entities have been compromised? Otherwise, why would those name servers serve them so actively? Well, anyone can claim any IP on any resource on the internet, advertising it. It doesn't mean that they have an ownership. But given that New York Times was compromised, perhaps all others were also compromised and were redirected. So let's keep this in mind as well. Now let's take another, the second part of the infrastructure we discovered. Again, we are talking about strictly the time period we want to learn about. And we are asking what resources were served by that name server. So we are searching through the resource record and bring everything where this name server has been observed. So what we see is more domains here as well. And again, New York Times and TWIMG and some others were there. So we see more domains. And the question now is, shall we check the old news and validate where the other resources, like Twitter, for example, or other newspapers, were compromised? So that would be your homework. Now, let's summarize our findings. So what have we learned? We learned that it was New York Times web server To reach this server, you would need to be pointed at from their name server, from their DNS. To reach this server, you would need to be pointed from the .com GTLD. This is how things would go. Okay, what then has happened with New York Times? As we already saw, the registrar has been compromised. And the registrar started to point everyone who was asking for name server for New York Times elsewhere. And we already learned there were two infrastructures. These were the name servers which were responsible to point at the new New York Times web server. Effectively, what happened was that this part of the internet has disappeared from the face of our planet. For internet surfers, of course. It doesn't mean that if somebody hitting this IP would not be able to reach it, or asking this name server wouldn't be able to be pointed at New York Times. But that's not how internet normally works. You go to the root gives you to the com gives you to the authoritative name server, and then you will find the resource for that domain. So now we have malicious infrastructure, which was name server 1 and name server 2, or set of name servers. Let's start with this one. This name server or name servers were pointing for New York Times, the fake New York Times, at the same IP, which was .37. So those name servers were on the same IP as New York Times fake web servers. That gives us an idea that the whole this infrastructure or whole this IP was owned, a system and the IP were owned by the serial electronic army. And it was many different resources served by name server, as well as pointing at other resources which we suspected to be compromised, like Twitter, for example, some other newspapers. We found the same on this infrastructure, not at the same extent, but there were also several resources we're pointing out. But those name servers were pointing at a different system with a different IP, if you remember, which was ending 121. That behavior let us suspect that only the services here were compromised. And that system of web server, which served perhaps something else. We didn't investigate it here, but it would be good for you to investigate as a homework. Also were compromised, but the actors put something or change records the same way as they did here, and that only what they have done. Now it would be again your homework to go and figure whether our hypotheses were accurate or not, and whether it was the case. It was 7 years ago. Plenty of reports are out there, but we acted on an assumption that we don't know anything about that, and we used the evidence of what has occurred at that time to drive us to our conclusions. Takeaways from this compromise or hijacking investigation. What is that important we need to take? First of all, it is very important to understand that the event which has happened a long time ago are still being recorded in passive DNS. And these are objective observation, objective evidence of those events which has happened. It is up to us to look at that evidence and make a call, a judgment, whether those observations, those evidence could be evidence of the activity we are investigating. This is very important. This is very important to learn that we at Farsight Security, we do not cast judgment on those observations. These are just objective data, and it would be your task, your job to use that data and decide whether it is bad or good, or what additional investigations need to be made. But you are equipped with objective observations, with the data, with the evidence of the events which has occurred. What else you need to do? You need to look for common patterns. And this is exactly what we were doing. We're step by step looking at what has happened at that time, and we were uncovering step by step the things which we call playbook or pivoting. What have we done? Just to make sure it sits well in your mind. We found the exact time of the incident. That exactly was the point of our interest. Then we found what the changes were on IP and DNS infrastructure at the time of the incident. It will be your homework to go and look at the infrastructure over time and see how that was changed, especially on the second part we investigated, which was not under full control of the Syrian Electronic Army. Also, we found what other hosts were on the same IP. It was very important to understand to what extent the problem we observed has occurred. We also found other domains which were served by the same name server at that time. So that has helped us to understand whether other resources were compromised. And we found that potentially it could be some newspapers, Twitter, and so on. Once again, it's your homework to go back. Those records exist, and you will find whether our hypothesis was accurate or not, and whether it was found at that time or not. And would it be useful to have this powerful methods and data at the time of the incident for the investigator to have for their investigation? And was their investigation be equipped with something that could help them to do the investigation faster and better? And also, those suspected domain could have been compromised by the same actor and the same campaign. And that conclusion we can make only looking at the data and having the experience of this kind of investigations. Well, that's it. But before we say goodbye, we would like to say happy hunting. Please join Farsight Lab. This is non-commercial. Free community place to try our new tools and ideas. We have a discussion forum. You can pose your questions, you can get answers, and if you couldn't get the answers from the community, please get to our support, and we're always there for you to help and assist. For more resources, please also visit our website. This would be your continuous education on what the passive DNS can do and how passive DNS can assist you. Also, you would find a lot of information about our partners. Not necessarily you need to use our tools. Perhaps you have someone from the vendors. We already have very tight integrations and connections, so you can use our API keys to drive the investigations through their platforms if need to be. News and examples. We have blog posts. We are very active in that area. Snippets of the code, ideas, the investigation techniques. Please visit and learn. There's a lot of very interesting stuff there. So you probably got some trial key and you wonder what happened if that key has expired. Well, we can give you this for free. Please visit and check whether you are qualified for that activity. Also, try our free community edition. Just visit, register yourself, make sure you satisfy all the requirements, and you will receive the key that you can again use with our tools or with the tools of your choice. And if you need more than just grant and free edition can offer, you can form a commercial relationship with us. For that, you please reach our sales teams. Please note that we offer very significant discount to those who contribute in passive DNS data, installing sensors in their environment. Also, please be aware that by design, in principle, we don't see any private information. We are not for PII, and that information in principle is avoided to be recorded by the architecture, by the design. Doing so, we will help us to make the internet a safer place to everyone. Thank you.